has it ever been approved at this time?
As far as I know, no, it has not been approved right now.
So there was an alleged apparition. Bishop comes to investigate the divine miracle child. Okay, so let's watch this video.
Yo he públicamente manifestado mi disponibilidad a ayudar todo eso y nadie se ha acercado.
I've been very open about it.
Yo llamé, nadie contestaba.
Escúcheme,
No.
el mismo día
Mire.
que él apareció en la iglesia,
Como dice hoy día, también él es el párroco y todo lo que es religioso se corta.
pero no quiere diálogo.
Todo lo que es
No quiere
religioso
diálogo.
en la parroquia. Este santuario.
No quiere dialogar con comerciales. Mete candado a la puerta.
Explain what's happening.
So you have the mob there trying to block you. Is the police there to and the victim and all that? And the mob is saying there's not a conversation to be had. You guys, you don't want to talk to us. And the bishop is literally saying, I'm literally here. I'm talking. I'm making phone calls. Nobody's picking up my phone calls. And, you know, this is not my issue. And it's my duty to defend what belongs to the Catholic faith. So you have, you know, a conflict there. Something I want to notice or want to point out to in that video, notice the bishop his leadership is very calm, by the way. He's not necessarily yelling like hysterical. He's not engaging in insults or like it's your fault or pointing fingers. He's just saying, this is what I've done. So whatever accusation is brought to me by this mob is like, it doesn't hold ground. This is what I've been doing and no answers so far. There's no dialogue that you guys want to have of it clearly. And he's not even like bringing police to push people out, whatever it is. He's still, if you notice, in the midst of people.
Yeah, he's surrounded by a mob of people. It's just him.
That's a lot of courage, Timothy. Honestly, that's a really bad position to be, you know, when it comes to safety. You never want to be caught. Literally, you're better off in a mosh pit than that. I mean, it's
I
just
think
not...
there's like 1 or 2 police officers present. But here, let's continue, and so you can read these yellow subtitles. Those of you who are watching.
Candado a la puerta y no nos deja ingresar.
Look at his hands.
Pero si ni el obispo puede hablar cuando viene porque me interrumpen continuamente, no hay espíritu cristiano. Me cierran la puerta, ponen llave. El obispo cerrado fuera en un lugar que es de la diócesis. Díganme ustedes que es católico en eso.
So he's saying that the Catholic bishop, those of you who are listening to the podcast, so Bishop Prevost is patiently explaining. He's saying, I cannot speak to you because you're interrupting me, and I'm being locked out of my own parish that belongs to the diocese.
Yeah.
How is that Catholic? That is what he's asking.
Cuando en realidad se está luchando simplemente por el control de la iglesia.
¿Cómo lo llevó al niño? Que le cuente también el padre.
Es mi deber. Hermanos, hermanas, es mi deber. Es mi deber como obispo de la diócesis preocuparme con el punto católico.
So he says, brothers and sisters, hermanos and hermanas, it is my duty as bishop of this diocese to safeguard the integrity of the Catholic faith. So this is like when he finally kind of raises his voice just a little bit, and he's trying to, but he still calls them brothers and sisters, trying to explain.
By the way, being a bishop,
his authority out. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's been a bishop. And notice the way they are addressing him. May I remind a lot of people who are watching, we're not egalitarian. We're worth the same in value to the eyes of God, but there's still a hierarchy. You address the bishop as your excellency, right? This is not like just a peer that you're talking to. Well, the woman there, and a lot of people are talking to the bishop with no decor and regard from it. You know, we can have disagreements. That's valid. That's, you know, again, we're Catholic, but there's still a line of respect that has to be drawn and preserved. That's not being held there in a mob situation. The bishop, it's very common, like I mentioned earlier, in that situation in Latin America, Timothy, often it takes nothing, like a split second, and in America too, I'm sure, for things to go south, like to
Violent,
next thing you know, there's like, thank God that didn't happen, obviously, but like this is putting yourself in harm's way. I know there's different bishops that wanted to promote it through the conclave. They're trying to promote them to be popes because they put themselves in harm's way, which is very noble. Honestly, it's a very courageous thing, especially in the Middle East. That's very, very worth noting and preserving and promoting. This is also a situation where you're in harm's way. It may not look a lot like you to you, but if you're in Latin America and you're caught like right there, boy, that's a tough spot. That's definitely something you don't want to be.
So you're saying in Spanish, the mob in Spanish are not really speaking very respectfully to their own bishop.
No,
they're not using the Spanish. I don't know if Spanish, like in French, they have different formal address versus what.
Su Excelencia, Your Excellency.
Okay. So let's talk about the Peruvians that you know personally, that you've talked to. If people don't know, Luis is connected in all of Hispanidad across the world. He talks with people all over the place. By the way, Reconquista Network. Go subscribe to that. Click the link below. En Espanol. Everything's in Espanol for you. All your work.
Online. I know. I gotta do English content. They keep asking me to do English content.
This is your English content.
I know.
But any Spanish speakers out there, go take a look at Luis's work at Reconquista Network. So tell me about the Peruvians that you've talked to that you know. How are they all responding to Pope Leo's election?
The overall reaction has been very, very positive. Just like, honestly, it mirrors a lot of the American reaction. At the beginning, before we heard anything, before we saw anything, as soon as we found out, I noticed in the U.S. they were a little bit like weary. Peru's kind of the same. They're like, but then once he stepped in and we heard him and we saw what he did and all that, everybody overall is very happy. Peruvians actually feel very proud. Maybe there's a small fraction of the elite and obviously the left-leaning, people over there, they're not going to like it. But the overall society, they feel very proud. They actually claim him in a lot of ways. They're like, he's one of us, because he does hold dual citizenship in Peru. And technically, I kindly remind them, the Peruvians, is he's American. I mean, obviously he loves Peru, and he's American. He's literally from Chicago. He's a White Sox fan. I mean, the guy grew up in the U.S. and he's as American as he gets, and that's that beautiful thing, honestly. And maybe a lot of the very rigid traditionalist circles may have a problem by the fact that he's actually American, not even from the Catholic part, but like American. Again, that's their personal struggles, right? I'm not concerned about that, but the overall Peruvian society embrace him. And they see it as a badge of honor, like one of our guys actually became Pope. So they almost see it like, okay, it's one of our guys that we share with America, essentially. In if you can put it in a nutshell. So obviously, Prevost has a lot of enemies in Peru on the communists. Communists hate him. Yeah. And then there's these other people on the right side, the traditionalist. And when I say traditionalist, we shouldn't really use that term because the Anglophone world, that means something totally different than the Latin American world. Yeah. Because, and this is what I got to emphasize, you said it before, but let me just emphasize it again. Because of the situation of Peru, the right wingers, we'll just call them right wingers in particular. I'm not sure if any, are there any Latin masses in Peru? Is this there are Latin masses. Okay. Yeah. But are the Latin? I'm sure that there's a overlap between the Latin mass crowd and the right wingers too. That's just going to happen. But for those who are defended the sodalitium, and the difficulty with this whole situation of sodalitium is that you have, and this is the same thing because with Oxygen Francés and all that stuff, because when you have half a dozen bad actors who are just bad people and they did bad things. And then you have the massive faithful who are a part of an organization and they're probably all very pious. And that's the tricky part. And how do you deal with, people can debate, should they have suppressed the whole thing? Should they have just, sacked the bad guys, try to reform the thing? This is always the difficulty with all the clerics dealing with different things. People have said, speaking of Mexico, they say, we should suppress the Legionaries of Christ, for example, which was very corrupt, the leader and everything, terrible stuff. But they decided in that case that they'd sack the bad guy, try to take out the bad actors, try to make the thing still. This is happening in my neck of the woods because there's a community of St. John where they had the same thing happen to them. And I have some friends who are part of this organization, and the spirituality itself is very, very good. Yeah.
But they had some bad actors. The founder turned out to be terrible, and all this sort of thing. This is a very difficult trauma that people have to deal with, especially if you're a pious member of this organization. Like, let's say you're a pious member, it helped form you, and I get that. So I get the anger that might be directed at Prevost as a result of this situation. So you have some of those enemies who are criticizing him from that point of view. So it is the overall attitude of the Peruvians that besides the fact that, hey, he's Peruvian, like, how do they feel about him as a bishop, as a shepherd of the faithful, whose duty is to safeguard the integrity of the Catholic faith?
He left a really good impression as a bishop in the Peruvian society, especially because he was involved with the poor, with people who have no access. He was not as involved as with the elites. Obviously, he has some involvement with them because once you're a bishop, you have to deal with all sorts of people. But really, even as a bishop, they recognize that he was still where he hasn't forgotten. And even in his papacy, one of the first things he did is a shout out to the Peruvian society. So, like you say, he's married to his diocese till this day. And that's the perception that the vast majority of Peruvians have of him, with the exception of the fringes groups that we just talked about. So overall, it's a very positive, very good image that they have of him based on his work as a bishop, even more than his work as a priest.
So one of my best friends is he's Anglo, but he's a Spanish speaker, done a lot of work in Mexico. And he said that even in Mexico, there's places in Mexico that are so rural that they don't even get priests very often. Is it the same in Peru? Do they have places, rural poverty?
Well, yeah, especially in Peru, you have this combination in Peru, which is mountains and deserts, and it's so hard to build roads.
Yeah, right.
Like, think about it like, okay, there's a reason why we don't have a lot of roads like west of Wyoming and Utah and those parts of the U.S. And this is in America, right? It's hard, man. Infrastructure is hard to maintain. Well, and that's America. Imagine a third world country, with all due respect. It's challenging too. That being said, because I know we're running out of time, in Latin America, one of the major problems that we have, to make a contrast, is, and have had it for a while, is Catholicism is so embedded in society that it becomes a cultural norm. But that doesn't mean that the hearts are changed. Literally, we have so many Catholics in name out there that they're not really living the faith. Whereas in America, the American experience has been a little different, is noticeably different, because the Catholicism that we live overall here, because we don't have it's changing, but we don't have a cultural dominance, is still a Protestant-led heritage, if you want to put it that way. And I'm not saying it's bad, or it's just, pointing to something obvious. The people who decide to embrace the faith, they actually have to do it usually very willingly. It's a very volitional act, because the culture is not really supporting that. And again, it's changing, praise be to God, and it looks like it might change a lot with this Pope, but historically that has not been the case. So Catholicism is lived a lot different in America than it is lived in Latin America. They got used to it in a lot of ways. Let me put that in that form. Whereas here we have to embrace it, kind of like the Spaniards. Honestly, they didn't have time to do like the Protestant thing because they had the Moors. So they didn't have time for nonsense and inside fights, because they're like, we got to define who we are.
No time for lukewarmness when you're dealing.
Either you're Moor or you're Christian, and the only way you're going to protect against the Moor is being Catholic. That's it. Whereas you can afford that luxury, to put it that way, in the northern part of Europe.
Okay. So this has been so fascinating. I can't wait to talk more. There's so much more to go in. Just want to plug everybody. So the Hispanidad series that we did with Luis, we've done like 10 hours worth of content. So you can click on this playlist. We have a series called Catholic Empire, The True Story of Spain and the Faith, that goes from the origins of the Baroque Christendom all the way to the day. I was just noting the beauty of, so if you go to Chiclayo, you see the beauty of the Baroque architecture. This is what's so glorious about American Christendom, and I say American, North and South American, is that there's this Baroque architecture, because this was the Baroque Christendom that was being built by our forefathers in the Americas. You see this in Quebec City, up in my neck of the woods, and then you see it in this southern region with built by Spain and Portugal. But you can learn all about that at our playlist. I'm going to republish all this stuff as well. We also have a series called Empress of the Americas, all about Spanish Guadalupe, Aztec Guadalupe, all sorts of beautiful, amazing things about Guadalupe, of course. So take a look at that. You can go to meaningofcatholic.com/register, support our work. This is our Lace Apostolate. And you can click the link below, get in touch with Reconquista Network in Espanol. Luis, final thoughts, final comments on Peru so far, and then what are we going to talk about next time?
Well, first of all, I want to thank for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be in this channel. I love interacting with all of y'all. Second of all is remember, obviously, regardless of nationalities, you know, God is sovereign and God is love. So please, you're never too far from his reach. And then regarding Peru, keep tracking that. You know, great things are going to come out of that. His experience, what he learned in Peru. If you want to understand his papacy, like you said about St. John Paul II, if you want to understand Pope Leo XIV, you got to look at Peruvian society, and a lot of things will make sense, you know, by then. Next time, hopefully, we'll talk about pre-Columbian societies. If you know, as long as the schedules align, we're going to talk about pre-Columbian societies because there's a key distinction between the Incas and the Aztecs and how that shaped the culture in both societies. So it's going to be really cool. So don't miss it.
Fantastic. Okay, so stay tuned for that. Let's ask the Empress of the Americas to help us and protect Pope Leo XIV. Let's pray. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Jesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et hora mortis nostre. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.